So for the latest interview for UK Cigar Scene, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Darren Cioffi, who's in the UK very briefly for the next round of the World Cigar Smoking Championship. Darren is the owner of Principal Cigars out of Nashville in the USA. Darren, welcome to London.
Thanks very much, Nick. Great to finally meet you after all these years of knowing you.
Yeah, our friendship's been virtual. It's strange how that happens, isn't it? But it's great to meet you too, and I'm delighted you've made it over for the London leg of the Cigar World Championship. We're going to come on to talk about that, but tell us about how you first got into the cigar world.
When I was in high school, I started buying and selling bits of old things, antique clocks and books and things like that. And early on I got into paper. And actually the thing in antique paper that first caught my interest were cigar labels.
Okay.
I walked into a shop, I found a box of old cigar labels, and I didn't really understand what they were at the time, but they were so stunning to me that I bought them. And it quickly encompassed everything that I was doing. I focused on, in that industry, nothing but finding, buying these old cigar labels. And these are basically the images on the inside of a cigar box,
okay,
but the labels that were never actually applied to the boxes. So I started buying them everywhere. At the time I was selling at 26th Street Market in New York City, at the Annex, the old antique market that was there. And I remember I would just take all of my money that I would make at the time, because I was a 17-year-old kid, and I would put it back into hunting down cigar labels. And that was my life. And I started traveling to the Caribbean and to Europe, looking for more labels than just the American ones. And after having done that for some time and being around the cigar culture, I honestly don't remember when my first cigar was. People always ask me that, but I started smoking, and it all stemmed from that.
And was that, what sort of time period was that you were doing that?
I was probably, it had to be when I was around 18 or 19 years old. I started in the paper around 16 or 17.
Right.
Yeah.
And so was that a time when there wasn't really a market for that sort of product?
It was on the cusp of being understood. I mean, these things had been discovered and sort of pulled out of old barns and things back in the 1970s and 80s. So they had been out there, but because they were discovered in groups together, people had the incorrect perception that they were common. So you might have found 100 of a label in a small town where a mom and pop had a cigar brand, so they had a label created. And somebody pulled 100 unused labels out, and you think, well, these are common because I have 100 of them, but that's the only 100 of that image in the world, potentially. Right. And then you have a lot of samples and progressive proofs and things where you may only have one image or 5 images. So it was actually quite rare. All I understood was that the subject matter was fantastic. They were accessible at a reasonable price. I could find little groups of them. You could also market them in a way that was more like conventional goods, because here was an antique item, but one that you could have more than one of.
Right.
So that appealed to me. And there was just something about it that I loved. I mean, to this day, my calling in life, as much as cigars in a way are my life, cigar label and cigar artwork, early tobacco art really is my passion.
And in terms of where the cigars, or where that the industry was from, that this is from all over the world, or mainly American brands, or
It was a worldwide phenomenon, but the US is the easiest to talk about and understand, particularly because I understand the market the best. But you had, around the turn of the century, everyone smoked. Not like, I don't mean like in the 90s cigar boom. I mean the turn of the century, the US, every man smoked. Maybe 99% of men smoked. And the corner of every major corner in every city was a cigar store. So you also had a largely illiterate population and this massive industry trying to serve it. So this created a perfect storm where all of these manufacturers are competing for your nickel when you walk in the store, and the only way they have to get your nickel is that 6x9 piece of paper in a cigar box.
Right.
You walk in, you look into a big glass counter, and you have 30 pieces of paper in front of you. What are you going to smoke? So they did everything they could to try to appeal to your senses, which is why this is the finest color printing that the world has ever seen. I mean, to this day, turn of the century, cigar, chromolithography, it's it.
Right.
The subject matters were fantastic, and every subject you can think of was covered. The names, the quality of the printing. These lithographers went to work in white suits and top hats, and it's not even something that can be reproduced today. These stone lithographs, forget about the artwork. Okay, we commissioned amazing artwork, but then just to print that label if there are 10 colors in the lithograph, we're going to engrave 10 Bavarian limestones, each one's weighing maybe 400 pounds. And by the way, they all have to hit this paper with the registration of a pinpoint. Then we got to gold emboss it, you know, and just the process was so insane, but it was all to get that nickel out of the consumer.
Wonderful. And so you've built up or traded and built up a huge collection, and you still have a huge collection today?
Yeah, I have a massive amount of this stuff. I mean, when I started doing it in the 90s, there were some other people that had much deeper pockets than a high school kid doing the same thing in other parts of the country. And so it was kind of at just the right time where I was still able to acquire things, yet they were able to sort of put money through the business because I was in a better position to unearth the paper.
Right.
So I used that as an opportunity to just go around and buy. And these days I'm not so active in selling, but I'm always still acquiring. I love it. You know, the vintage artwork is very influential in what I do today with Principle and how my brands look and feel. And it is still a big part of my life.
And what if you could take your whole collection and look at it? What are your favorite piece or pieces of that collection?
I'm a treasure hunter at heart, so I get really excited when I see little groups of stuff around. So sometimes 10 of something excites me a little more than one of something special. But I've put so much away that, you know, it's not an economically viable business because the world still has not caught up with how special these things are.
Okay.
But they're still, you know, available at a level that's way less than what they should be.
Right.
And so I always envision that when I am an old man, and I'm getting rapidly closer and closer to that, I will probably be sitting around a table futzing with this stuff all day long, and that will be my life at some point.
And by that time, the market...
By that time, I'm not going to care about money. I've got the stuff, you know. So smoke my cigar, play with my labels, and that'll be that.
Well, the market will have actually caught up and figured
and
what the value is. That'll happen.
That's where we'll be. Yeah.
That'll happen. So what's the market like today? What's for those old labels? Yeah.
Well, one problem is you have collectors coming in and they want, you know, they immediately go from, you know, very simple available labels to immediately wanting $1,000 labels, and we can't have a market with nothing but collectors that want extremely expensive labels. So the result is that it's created an issue in the mid-range where you have fantastic 100-year-old chromolithography that's very, very rare and it's extremely underpriced. So that's the sort of pocket where I've been buying things.
Right.
So I've gotten rid of the junk. I still buy the exceptional things, but you're talking about labels where maybe they only discovered a few hundred and they're fantastic looking and the value is dollars, you know, not a lot of money. And,
got it.
And so I'm always accumulating.
And that love of the artwork, as you said, then led you into to actually try a cigar, and then that moved you on into creating your own brand, into creating Principle.
At some point I started smoking cigars. The other thing, being a treasure hunter and antique dealer, I was into the vintage packaging. So I went from cigar labels to appreciating antique cigar boxes, cigar posters, advertising, anything I could. And one thing I started finding a lot of were vintage cigars, or, you know, really early boxes with, you know, with the product intact. When I say vintage cigars in my world is not, you know, a 10 or 20-year-old Cuban, it's 1870s through the 1950s, you know, where the packaging itself is as interesting, or not, if not more interesting than the product that's contained. So we have examples from, like I said, from the 1870s, about 3 or 4 boxes, all the way through the mid-century. And again, the designs and seeing how these complete things were put together is really fantastic. And I smoked a lot of that stuff too. I mean, I had tried everything under the sun, and before I started playing around making cigars, which I've done for about 15 years now.
And how did that actually start? So how do you start in the States? How do you actually sit down and start to create your own brand and cigars?
In the beginning, you're dealing with I think my first foray was probably something out on a farm somewhere. You know, you're dealing with farmers, not so much master blenders or anything like that. You know, you're just seeing it's more of a ground level thing with people that are maybe making something for themselves, and then you take it up and you start looking for more special tobacco. Then you start playing around with. One thing that I have done and that I've really scaled up now is we have a lot of vintage cigars that have some sort of issues. So we'll have let's say a box of cigars where it's from 1920 and half of them are fine, but because they were jostled at some point, there are cracks in some of the wrappers.
Right.
So we'll actually take those, carefully remove the bands. I bring them to the Dominican Republic. And then Hendrik Kellner has some really early Davidoff wrapper we've been using that's just very light and delicate and doesn't do a lot in terms of flavor to affect the cigar. So we leave the existing wrapper in place and then just put a new wrapper on top of it.
Right.
So all the flavors are there, the old wrapper becomes a second binder, and then suddenly you have a cigar that's 80, 100 years old that no one was meant to smoke, that's now totally smokable.
Right.
You get flavors in some of these. I mean, as a whole, everything tends to have settled down a lot, but you do get some bizarre flavor profiles that you wouldn't have experienced otherwise.
And that's all part of your learning process, I suppose, for what you want to do.
Some you can try to recreate, some gives you an idea, and some you just nothing you can do with.
Right. Yeah. And so then you decided you were going to create your own cigars. And so where do you go? What did you do?
I get bored very easily, so I try smoking all different things, and it's particularly having access to all the vintage stuff, I get bored. I made my own cigars as a tool to alleviate that boredom and to smoke new things, and I didn't really think that it was something that I could expand, because I would find a tiny little bit of tobacco and make some cigars, and if they were good, fantastic, but this is not something that I can mass produce. And it wasn't until talking with Hendrik a few years ago that I made the decision that it could actually be something that I could productionize even on a very tiny level, which is what we've done.
Right. And so this is Hendrik Kellner, and his group in the Dominican Republic. So we interviewed Henke for the June issue, and what a fascinating guy, and with a huge operation around him with his family in the Dominican Republic, and the access to some really special tobacco.
And that's it. Like at the end of the day, we can all. I'm a good blender. I know what I like to taste. I know what I'm going for in a cigar, but it doesn't matter how great a blender you are, it's all about what you have access to. And if you're tiny and you do have access to something great and it does produce an awesome product, and there's a very good chance somebody's going to come up and scoop it and prevent you from an ongoing thing. But with Hendrik Jr. and Hendrik and access to where they're positioned, I've been very lucky and fortunate to use some things that otherwise I would not be able to.
So having interviewed Henke and understood the way he works in terms of production and blending, how does the process start when you sit down with him and his son and his group to actually produce a cigar?
It starts with a conversation. You know what you're trying to create. It could start with it's just like an artwork, right? When I'm commissioning artwork, I never like to tell the artist too much because they're the creative one, right? I know where I'm trying to go. I might know that, okay, this has to be Art Deco, it has to look like European, not American Art Deco, it has to be not so industrial. Here are the points I want to hit, show me some ideas. I don't want to say it has to have an angel, it has to have this, it has to have that, because I'm paying you because you're smarter than me in this area.
Right.
And it's the exact same with tobacco. Rather than hand someone a cigar and say, this is good, copy this, I could say, this is what I'm trying to achieve, these are the vitolas I think through which we will achieve it. Here's what I like, here's what I don't like, show me a good starting point. And so then you can begin at that starting point and then try to take it into a new direction. You don't want to, it's always good to learn new things, but your starting point with guys like this is so much higher than what it's going to be for you to try everything and, start making the soup without just taking the broth in the beginning.
Yeah.
And, when I first arrived in the Dominican to do this, everything, I tend to enjoy leather and I tend to enjoy sweet characters in cigars.
Okay.
And so much was woodsy, overwhelmingly woodsy. I kept smoking people's blends and I felt like I was licking trees. It was overwhelmingly cedary, and that's not what I'm interested in. I don't like a dry cigar. I don't do harsh spice. I want everything well balanced and within the flavor profiles I enjoy. I enjoy sweet, I enjoy citrus, I enjoy rich, creamy, leathery, and this is where I wanted to go. So the first hurdle for me was overcoming all of the wood that was coming at me from all over in the flavors.
And so, and Henke and his group bring, I should imagine, a fantastic experience from the discussion with him, but also some wonderful tobaccos, because he just knows that sourcing and
Yeah.
that side of it.
Yeah, I've gone tobacco shopping with Henrik Jr. and that's where I don't have the skills. I mean, I can't look at a bale of tobacco and immediately tell that there was an issue with the curing process, you know. But he can. You know, we've walked into big places where everyone's sourcing tobacco, and you know, I've been told very bluntly there's nothing here to buy. I'm sorry, you know. So it's having that as your starting point has been very important for me. I know where I'm trying to get, but that saved me a whole lot of hassle in the early part of the process.
Right. And so, tell us about the blends that you've created to date and the cigars, because you're not talking about huge quantities here. This is small quantities.
Most of our cigars we make runs of a few thousand sticks.
Okay.
Aviator series, which is some of our more complex cigars, are everything tends to be medium body, medium flavor, medium body, but with a lot of flavor.
Right.
Aviators tend to be complex. They're all dynamic. A lot of my cigars are larger vitolas, so they tend to be. You want them to change so you don't get bored, like I do all the time. And you know, as you smoke them, they tend to get stronger. So whatever those flavors are, like in the Banquier, they're very. You know, these start off with a little bit of licorice and some woody tones, but as you smoke it, you tend to get more molasses and caramel, and the sweet flavors build and build. So it almost changes on a dime at that 50% point. The another one, the Cochon Volant, which is our version of the Flying Pig, same thing. It starts off and it gets sweeter, but instead of those rich, deep flavors, you get more of like a honey and a lighter sweetness to it. And then I use a lot of Peruvian tobacco as well, because Henrik gets some great Pelo de Oro. So in our Robusto, which is the Envoy, we use that in a double binder. So the sweetness that comes it's a slight alternative where it's much crisper. And then he also has some great tobacco that gives us those citrus tones. And citrus is a bit of a departure from Aviator series. So in a lot of our limited editions, if you ever smoke an Opus and you get that rich citrus, we kind of go for that flavor, and we do it in a lot of our limited runs for the cigars that have the gold bands.
Brilliant. And so, and when you're dealing then with Henke and his group, it sounds as though you've got access to a huge palette of tobaccos to work with.
Yeah, it's all so vibrant and so good that it's hard to make a bad cigar.
Right.
It's just a function of what are you trying to achieve, you know, and I usually know where I'm trying to go. And sometimes it's hard to communicate that across. You know, you keep trying and trying, but then you hit on the right blend, and then they get the idea, and then they understand more what you're trying to do and can take it a step further.
Got it. And you gave me a cigar earlier with the wrapper, which was, I mean, honestly, if I hadn't known, the wrapper looked Cuban quality. It was beautiful.
That was some Cuban seed banao wrapper. It was, piloto.
Right.
Piloto wrapper that had just been sitting around for a long time. We found it was a few years age, so we use it only for the wrapper. Yeah.
Again, that's an area I'm sure with Henke and his group where you've got that he knows where there's some amazing sourcing. So you're also telling me that you're doing some extraordinary things with cigars in terms of just adding something to it with bourbon.
We're trying to be unique, right? So I look at what do we have access to. So the one thing is I'm in antique paper for 20 plus years now, right? And so we've created some project where we use antique material in the construction of the boxes. So we have this one project called Money to Burn that has actual 1921 railroad bonds that are used in the construction of the box.
Right.
So you get a box that was printed in 1921, and then we use the coupons from the bond as the footbands. It's printed by American banknotes, so it's all very striking. Looks like currency. And then the other thing we had access to is we do a lot locally with a bourbon company, Angel's Envy. So we started aging some cigars in bourbon casks, and the combination of this Kellner product, we've been using a short Robusto, and this cask strength bourbon, and this is a cask that has been used once for port and then twice for bourbon.
Okay.
The outcome has been really outstanding, and I mean, I knew it was going to be great, but it's been unbelievable.
And so where, in 5 years' time, everything works out, ideally, where do you see Principal Cigars being in 5 years?
Well, I'm been fortunate enough to be ahead of schedule. You know, I love tobacco, so this is a pet project. I don't have to eat off of this, so I can do it the way I want to do it.
Right.
And things keep happening that are bumping me beyond where I expected to be. I didn't expect to have start winning all these championships, which has put my name out in Europe. You know, it's completely possible that in 5 years I have more of a European brand than I do in the U.S. A couple of nights ago on television, Jerry Seinfeld chose to smoke Cochon Bouillon with Steve Harvey on his web series. So that was a huge bump. All of these things have been totally unexpected. So where will it be in 5 years? I would have been happy if in 5 years was where it is now. So wherever it is, I've been very lucky.
And so the reason we're lucky enough to have you here, we've alluded to it, is the UK leg, the London leg of the World Cigar Smoking Championship. Now you're the reigning world champion.
World champion and world record holder, yes. And
just explain, for those who haven't followed it in great detail, what that means and what that record is.
So this is the World Cigar Smoking Championship was started about 6 years ago by a gentleman named Marko Bilic, who runs Cigar Club Mareva in Split, Croatia. And he created this tournament, which is really ingenious because it's a competitive way to smoke a cigar, but in an extremely elegant way. The only things prior to this have been long ash contests and, in my opinion, half silly things that don't really interest me. But he came up with a way where everyone is smoking a Mareva-sized cigar, which is like, 42 or so by 5 inches. Mm-hmm. So it's very small. It's maybe a 30-minute smoke. And in a nutshell, it's how long can we smoke this cigar without it going out? So the rules are, there's a lot of rules, but in a nutshell, you have 2 matches. You have 1 minute to cut your cigar. You have 2 matches and 1 minute to light it any way you wish with those matches. Once it's lit, there's no more reignition. And there's a special tournament band that's attached to the cigar, and you're allowed to, you can't do any of the normal things you might do to keep a cigar going. Like if I were here without a lighter, I'd start blowing on it or blowing through it, and all those things are forbidden. You can't get up, you can't put it down, you can't talk for 5 minutes. There's a component where you can't ash for the first 40 minutes, and then there are penalty minutes based on when you do ash. And so all of these things combine to anyone who's new to it, when they sit down and do it, at first they think, maybe I'm scared of the rules or I'll just have some fun. But then they go out and they say, I can't wait to do that again. It's extremely addictive and very fun.
And your record is?
My record is 2 hours, 27 minutes, and 27 seconds.
And that's extraordinary.
It is a long time. Yeah, it is a long time for that sort of cigar.
Because I know, and we talked about this briefly, I tried this with a cigar and I could make the cigar last just under 2 hours. But I had to relight it. This is the
Right.
point. I had to relight it 7 or 8 times. So I wanted to see if I could actually, I'm a slow smoker,
Right.
okay, but I wanted to see how long I could go. But actually being able to do that and keep the cigar alight, I mean, that's just
Therein lies the
extraordinary.
trick. You're definitely dancing on the edge of barely smoking at all. But if you fall over that edge, then the contest is over.
And at any point, someone comes and asks you, sort of, make smoke, or how do they?
No,
how do you
there
know
are
what
judges that walk around and watch everybody.
Okay.
And you're supposed to self-report. So if you accidentally ash in the first 40 minutes, or if you go out, you raise your number.
Right.
But once it gets down to the end and there's just a few players left, then they'll be under heavy scrutiny to make sure that everybody still has smoke.
Right.
Yeah.
Extraordinary. And so, how many championships you've traveled around the world doing this?
Yeah,
right?
so I won the world championship last year, and then I've competed, and then I'm going to qualifying rounds this year. So I've won a total of 7 now. The world championship was in Split, Croatia, and then I competed I won Switzerland, the Croatian qualifier, Serbia, Sweden, Denmark, and now New York last weekend, and now here's London.
However,
I did not win Tallinn, which is really painful in my heart because it's a city through which I'm distributed in Europe, and I have many friends, and I had the awesome time of 4 minutes where my cigar went out. Yes, so that's my one loss. So I am 7-1.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a pretty good percentage.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah. And so then you're off to the event in London. So by the time this video goes out, you'll have done that. I'd be interested to see how that goes. And it's always the same cigar, right?
It's always a Mareva-sized cigar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. Well, we wish you good luck. Any tips for people taking part?
Yeah, one, don't be afraid. I mean, it's anyone's game. When I competed in the World Championship, it wasn't even on the radar that this was something I could win. So if you smoke cigars and you know your way around a cigar, you have a shot at it. So just go ahead and do it. And to just pay attention. You know, if you care about winning, then focus on what you're doing, because many people don't.
Right, you get distracted.
Including
from
me when
all
I practice. It's very hard to
circles.
focus, and your mind wanders.
Yeah, but when you're in a competition, everything's...
Yeah, with the pressure of the competition, it's a little bit easier to...
Yeah. Excellent. Well, that's brilliant. Well, I hope it's fascinating. Some of the groups I've talked to here, I think some of them will put people into the UK leg, but other people have talked about having private competitions just to see, because it's really opened people's eyes to it. So I think there'll be more people in the UK having a go and trying it in smaller sub-qualifying competitions ahead of doing this again. And I hope there'll be a London. I'm delighted that there is a London leg this year, and I hope that continues. Well, wonderful. Well, say by the time this is published, we'll know the result. But good luck for Thursday.
Thank you.
I'm sure you'll do
you
well.
as well. You are competing, right?
I don't know. I don't think so. I'm going to be there
I think
as
it's
a member
important.
of the press. After my last attempt, I'm not so sure. Okay, so we always finish with 3 standard questions. So number 1, if so you're smoking a cigar, what's your favourite thing to drink with a cigar? What do you like to accompany a cigar with?
My palate is very delicate. So I'm very conscious of what I call a retraction period. It's just like making love. When you make love, there's a certain amount of time that has to take place before you can do it again, right? So when you're smoking a cigar and you're pairing it with anything, there's a retraction period for your mouth. So if I'm having a big, strong beverage and I take a sip, then there's a period of time that my mouth has to adjust before I can get 100% from the cigar.
Right.
Likewise, if the beverage is too delicate and I smoke the cigar, or a cigar is too harsh, my mouth needs to adjust in order for me to get what I wish to get out of the beverage. So it's about finding cigars and drinks that are in the right balance so that you're having the full enjoyment of both things. So for that reason, I really, even though I'm located in Nashville and I'm in bourbon country, I tend not to smoke a lot, not to drink a lot of heavy whiskeys or bourbons unless they're in cocktail format.
Right.
For me, ports are almost there. It's a very small retraction period. Maybe you're talking about seconds. But syrupy, sweet white wines like a Sauterne or a Tokay, a wine like that with a well-balanced cigar, it's boom, boom, boom. Everything's perfect every puff. You mix some chocolate into the mix, some dessert, you're in perfect harmony. And it's really in a perfect world, a great Sauterne does it for me with tobacco.
That's really interesting. That sweetness. I tried a cigar with a Rusty Nails, a whiskey, and that just set the cigar up beautifully. Just certainly at the start. Fascinating. And given the choice, where's your favourite place to smoke a cigar? If you could sit and smoke a cigar anywhere in the world.
My favorite place to smoke a cigar is, for one, anywhere not in the wind, because if the smoke leaving my mouth is not elegant, then it just ruins the experience for me. So no matter how great the beach barbecue is, part of me doesn't enjoy the cigar if there's wind. But the other thing I would say is my favorite place to smoke a cigar is where, I care about the whole experience, and you don't want the experience to be interrupted. So if we go to lunch and we're having a fantastic conversation, we have some beautiful meal, some great wine or whatever we're enjoying, for that experience to flow right into the cigar and the dessert, so it's all a part of the same experience, you're getting so much out of that. And if you imagine we have that lunch and instead we have to cut it short, we're taking taxis to somewhere else, we're dealing with some nonsense where we finally find a place to smoke, then we feel hurried, it takes so much away from the experience. So my favorite place to smoke is any time where my enjoyment is not interrupted and everything is intact.
Got it. It's very true. There's so many cigars I've smoked that have been absolutely fantastic and ruined by just having to finish 20 minutes short.
Exactly. Who wants to deal with that?
No, you want to. If it's a great cigar, you want to enjoy it to the end.
We only have so many of these left before we're dead, so let's not chop them up and hurry them.
Yeah, so true. And finally, the most memorable cigar you ever smoked? Not necessarily the most expensive, but just the most memorable.
Well, the most memorable cigar I've ever smoked, without question, would have to be in the championship last year, because it was a Monte Cristo number 4 at that time, and you have to know that. I mean, I entered this thing just, I'll sponsor events in Europe or attend festivals just to maybe, meet a few people, maybe pick up a distributor or something. And I went there just for social reasons. It wasn't even like, winning wasn't even something that ever came in my head. So my goal was, don't look stupid, have a good time. And I remember smoking, and once like a few people had gone out, I said, okay, it's fine. You can go back to Nashville and not look like a fool now. So I did that, and then everyone kept dropping out. I ended up winning, breaking the world record at the time, and that feeling of suddenly, everyone standing around like I'm curing cancer or doing something incredibly important, and suddenly you're on television, and I mean, there was no feeling like that, and I can't imagine that I'll ever smoke a cigar again that comes with that sort of experience. So that was number 1.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, Darren, as the reigning world champion, it's been a fantastic to welcome you to London. Many success. Wish you great success this year, and thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Nick. Great pleasure.
Great with you.
Great
Thank
pleasure.
you.